In the summer of 1944, a 29-year-old sergeant created an invention that changed the course of World War II. Not in a laboratory, not in a factory, but in a field in Normandy, using scrap metal from German beach obstacles and a welding torch. This invention was so simple that it baffled an entire army. So obvious that everyone wondered why nobody thought of it sooner. And so effective that it broke through Hitler's most impenetrable defense in France. The invasion of Normandy was supposed to be the beginning of the end. D-Day, June 6th. The Allies stormed the beaches. Thousands died, but they made it ashore. They pushed inland. And then they stopped. Not because of German counterattacks, not because of lack of supplies, but because of something nobody had warned them about. Something that did not appear on any intelligence map. Something that had been there for centuries, waiting to kill them. The hedgerows. Ancient earthen walls that turned every field in Normandy into a fortress. For 5 weeks after D-Day, the Allied advance measured progress in yards, not miles. American Sherman tanks, designed to roll across Europe, became death traps. German gunners waited for the tanks to climb the hedgerows, then shot them in their exposed bellies. Tank crews burned alive. Infantry died by the hundreds trying to clear each field. The offensive was dying. Generals held emergency meetings. Engineers tried explosives, bulldozers, every solution they could think of. Nothing worked. And then a sergeant listened to a Tennessee hillbilly say something everyone thought was stupid. He looked at some scrap metal. And he had an idea. An idea so simple it would save thousands of lives. An idea that turned Rommel's beach obstacles into the weapon that smashed through Rommel's inland defenses. An idea that High Command would later call one of the most important tactical innovations of the war. This is that story. You are sitting in a smoky tent somewhere in Normandy. It is early July 1944. You are a tank sergeant, 29 years old. Ancient compared to most of the guys around you. You survived the Depression. You know how to fix things with whatever is lying around. And right now, you are listening to a bunch of soldiers complain about a problem that is getting men killed every single day. The hedgerows, the damn hedgerows. Nobody warned you about them before D-Day. Nobody told you that the French countryside is a nightmare maze of ancient earthen walls, 4 feet high, 15 feet thick, covered with centuries of tangled roots and brush. Every field is a fortress. Every hedgerow is a perfect German defensive position. And your Sherman tanks, those machines that were supposed to roll across France like an armored avalanche, are stuck. Because when a Sherman tries to climb over a hedgerow, it exposes its belly. The thinnest armor on the whole tank. And the Germans are waiting with Panzerfausts and 88mm guns. They see that vulnerable belly, and they kill you. Your division has been fighting for a month. Progress is measured in fields, not miles. Sometimes it takes a whole day to advance 300 yards. Casualties are mounting. Tank crews are dying. And the officers keep having meetings, trying to figure out what to do. They talk about using explosives to blow holes in the hedgerows. But that is slow, dangerous, and it tells every German within a mile exactly where you are. They talk about bringing in bulldozers, but the bulldozers get targeted immediately, destroyed. The German gunners know that if they kill the bulldozers, they stop the American advance. And then someone says something stupid. A Tennessee hillbilly named Roberts. He is sitting across from you, cleaning his rifle, and he says, without looking up, "Why don't we just get some saw teeth and put them on the front of the tank and cut through these hedges?" Everyone laughs. Saw teeth. Like a tank is a lawnmower. Like you can just cut through hedgerows that are older than America. Everyone laughs except you. Because you are from New Jersey. You worked through the Depression fixing things, making do. And you look at Roberts and you think, wait, that is not stupid. That might actually work. This is the true story of how Sergeant Curtis Coolin and a Tennessee hillbilly nobody remembers solved a problem that had stumped an entire army. How a simple idea, laughed at by everyone who heard it, ended up saving thousands of lives and breaking Hitler's Normandy defense. Let me tell you what really happened. First, understand the problem. The bocage. That is what the French called this countryside. Small irregular fields, no more than 300 feet across, each one surrounded by hedgerows. But these were not hedges like you have in your yard. These were earthen berms that farmers had been building for centuries. Every time they plowed their fields and found rocks, they carried them to the property line and piled them up. Generation after generation. Century after century. By 1944, these hedgerows were massive. 4 feet high, sometimes taller, 15 feet thick at the base. Packed earth reinforced with rocks and held together by root systems that had been growing for hundreds of years. The tops were covered with bushes and trees so thick you could not see through them. For infantry, the hedgerows were hell. The Germans dug foxholes right into the berms. Machine gunners, riflemen, perfectly protected from artillery, invisible until they opened fire. The Americans would clear one field, advance to the next hedgerow, and get cut down. Over and over. Field by field. The Germans became masters of the ambush. They knew every gap, every weakness, every approach. And they used the hedgerows like a fortress. For tanks, it was even worse. A Sherman tank weighed 33 tons. It could push through a lot of obstacles. And in theory, it could climb over a hedgerow. But the problem was what happened when it did. The tank would hit the hedgerow. The front would rise up. The tank would climb. And for a few seconds, the entire belly of the tank would be exposed, pointing up at the sky. The belly armor on a Sherman was only 1 inch thick. 1 inch. A German soldier with a Panzerfaust could kill it easily. An 88mm gun could punch through like the armor was not even there. And while the tank was climbing, its gun could not depress enough to shoot. It was pointing up. Useless. The tank was blind, vulnerable, and helpless. And the Germans knew it. They would wait. Let the tank start climbing. And then fire. Boom. Dead crew. Burning tank. 5 men gone. The American commanders knew this was a problem. General Omar Bradley, commanding the First Army, was getting desperate. Operation Cobra, the big breakout offensive, was supposed to launch soon. But if the tanks could not get through the hedgerows, the offensive would fail. The whole campaign would bog down. Men would keep dying, field by field, for months, maybe years. So Bradley asked for solutions. Engineers tried using explosives. Pack charges against the base of the hedgerow. Blow a hole. But it was slow. Dangerous. The explosion announced your position to every German in the area. And even when it worked, the hole was often too small or unstable for tanks. Bulldozers were tried. Specially equipped bulldozer tanks. But the Germans figured that out fast. Kill the bulldozer, stop the advance. Those vehicles became priority targets. Many were destroyed before they could do any useful work. Various units came up with ideas. The 79th Infantry Division had something. The 19th Corps demonstrated a set of prongs. 5th Corps invented brush cutters and green dozers. But none of them worked well enough. None of them were simple enough to manufacture quickly. None of them could be fitted to hundreds of tanks in time for Operation Cobra. And then Curtis Coolin heard Roberts say that thing about saw teeth. And Coolin did not laugh. He started thinking. He was a sergeant in the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, 2nd Armored Division, and he had an idea. The beaches, the German beach obstacles, those steel barriers the Germans had placed all over the Normandy beaches to stop landing craft. The Allies had cleared most of them by now. Thousands of tons of steel I-beams and angles and plates, just sitting there, scrap metal. And Coolin thought, what if we use that? What if we cut those beams to length, sharpen them, and weld them onto the front of a tank? Not to push through the hedgerow, not to climb over it, but to cut through it, like a plow, like a knife. Coolin grabbed a pencil. He sketched it out. 4 prongs, angled steel, welded to the front of a Sherman tank, attached to the armored transmission housing. The tank would charge the hedgerow. The prongs would bite into the earth and roots. And instead of climbing up, the tank would stay level. The prongs would cut through at ground level. The tank would push through under a canopy of dirt and roots, staying protected, keeping its gun aimed forward, never exposing its belly. He showed the sketch to his buddies. Some thought it might work. Others were skeptical. But Coolin was a sergeant. He had authority. He had access to welding equipment. And he had the steel. So he built a prototype. Scavenged German beach obstacles. Cut them down. 4 big prongs. Angled forward and down. Welded them to the front of a light tank. Then he tested it. Backed the tank up. Aimed at a hedgerow. Full throttle. The tank charged forward at 10 miles per hour. Hit the hedgerow. The prongs dug in. Dirt exploded upward. Roots tore, and the tank burst through. Stayed level. Gun forward. Completely protected. It worked. Word spread fast. Cullen's captain saw it. Then his major. Then his colonel. And finally, someone told General Bradley. On July 14th, Bradley came to see for himself. He watched Coolin's tank demonstrate. Watched it smash through a hedgerow like it was cardboard. Then he watched a Sherman do the same thing. And Bradley, a combat veteran who had seen everything, stood there in awe. This absurdly simple device, fashioned from scrap metal by a sergeant, had solved a problem that had baffled the entire Allied command for 5 weeks. Bradley later wrote about that moment. He said the tusk-like device was so simple that it had baffled an army. But now they had it. And he ordered immediate mass production. Every ordnance unit in 1st Army went to round-the-clock shifts, welding Coolin cutters onto every Sherman they could find. The steel came from Rommel's beach obstacles. The irony was perfect. German steel, intended to stop the invasion, was now being used to break through German defenses inland. They called them rhino tanks, because the prongs looked like rhinoceros horns. By the time Operation Cobra launched on July 25th, nearly 500 Coolin cutters had been produced. 3 out of every 5 tanks in 2nd Armored Division had them. And they changed everything. When Cobra began, the rhino tanks led the assault. They crashed through hedgerows that had stopped American advances for weeks. The Germans were caught off guard. Their defensive tactics, built around the assumption that American tanks would expose their bellies, suddenly did not work. The Shermans came through at ground level, guns blazing, moving fast. The bocage, which had been an impenetrable fortress, became just another obstacle. An obstacle the Americans could overcome. The impact on morale was enormous. President Eisenhower, years later, said that the night the Coolin cutter was demonstrated was one of the happiest moments for the Allied armies, because suddenly They knew they could break through. They could win. They were not going to be stuck in the hedgerows forever. Curtis Coulin tried to give credit to Roberts, the Tennessee hillbilly whose offhand comment sparked the whole thing. But Roberts was forgotten in the publicity. Nobody recorded his full name. Nobody tracked him down for interviews. Coulin, honest man that he was, kept trying to mention Roberts. But the story became about Coulin, the sergeant who invented the hedgerow cutter, the man who broke the stalemate. Max Hastings, the military historian, later wrote that Coulin became a very American kind of hero, the common man with common sense who beat the experts. Coulin was awarded the Legion of Merit. Exceptional service. His invention probably saved thousands of lives. How many tank crews did not burn alive because they did not have to expose their bellies? How many infantrymen survived because the advance moved faster, outpaced German reinforcements? We will never know the exact number, but it was significant. The British produced their own version. They called them prongs. 600 Mark I prongs delivered by August. Another 1,000 Mark II for Shermans and M10s. 500 Mark III for Cromwell tanks. Even some Churchill tanks got them. The Germans never developed an effective counter, because the Coulin cutter was not high-tech. It was just steel. Simple, brutal, effective. Curtis Coulin did not spend the rest of the war as a celebrity. He kept fighting. In November 1944, in the Hürtgen forest, he stepped on a landmine, lost his leg. He was evacuated, spent months recovering. The war ended while he was still in hospitals. When he finally went home to New York, he married Bernice Enright, took a job as a liquor salesman for Schenley Industries, and tried to live a normal life. He did not talk much about the war, did not seek attention. He was just Curtis Coulin, a guy who had an idea once, an idea that worked. He died in 1963, 58 years old. There is a plaque in Cranford, New Jersey, his hometown, commemorating his invention. And there are a few Rhino tanks preserved in museums, Shermans with those tusk-like prongs welded to the front, reminders of what one sergeant and a Tennessee hillbilly accomplished with scrap metal and common sense. This is the lesson of the Coulin hedgerow cutter, that sometimes the best solutions are simple, that common soldiers, the guys actually fighting the war, often know more about the problems than the generals, that you do not need advanced technology or complicated engineering. Sometimes you just need someone who is willing to listen to a stupid idea and realize it is not stupid at all. The experts were stumped. The engineers tried complicated solutions. The high command held meetings and wrote reports, and a sergeant looked at some scrap metal and thought, what if we just stick this on the front of the tank? And it worked. It actually worked. War is full of stories like this. Improvisation, ingenuity, someone making do with what is available and solving a problem everyone else thought was impossible. The Coulin cutter is one of the best examples, because it was so simple, because it came from the bottom up, not the top down, and because it genuinely changed the course of a battle, maybe even the course of the war. Without those hedgerow cutters, Operation Cobra might have failed. The breakout from Normandy might have been delayed by weeks or months. More men would have died. The war might have lasted longer. We cannot know for certain. But we know that Bradley considered the Coulin cutter essential. We know that Eisenhower called it revolutionary. We know that it worked. So remember Curtis Coulin. Remember Roberts, the Tennessee hillbilly whose name was lost. Remember the ordnance crews who worked round-the-clock welding prongs onto tanks. Remember the tank crews who charged hedgerows with those improvised plows and burst through instead of dying. Remember that sometimes the best weapon is not the most advanced or the most expensive. Sometimes it is just the one that actually works. Hitler's Atlantic Wall did not stop the invasion. Neither did the hedgerows of Normandy. Because a sergeant looked at some scrap metal and had an idea. And because a hillbilly said something everyone else thought was stupid. And because together, accidentally, they invented something that saved thousands of lives and helped win the war. That is the truth. That is what really happened. And that is why we should remember the Kulin hedgerow cutter. Not as a piece of military hardware, but as proof that sometimes the best ideas come from the people nobody expects, from the sergeants and the hillbillies, from the guys who just want to get the job done and go home, from the common soldiers who won the war,